Hey everybody, Tim here with today's episode of Star Trek Voyager, Season 7, Episode 19, Q2, which I'm pretty sure, I could be wrong, but I'm pretty sure that's the shortest title in any of the Star Trek. So this episode is one of my favorites. I absolutely adore this episode. I just think it's really interesting, it's really funny, and as most of you know, like, I'm a huge Q fan. Like, I've met John Delancey, super big fan of Q, and so any episodes with Q are going to get a little bit of a higher rating, just because he's my favorite. And so, that being said, this one with the son of Q just falls in line with that. Like, it's super amazing. I've watched this episode a ton of times. I actually remember this episode was on a rerun, just to kind of show you how old I am, and I had seen it in the TV guide because it used to tell you the titles of the episodes, and I remember recording it on a VHS tape because I love this episode so much. So, some of the random trivia facts to get them out of the way. This episode was directed by LeVar Burton, which is awesome to see Geordi direct a Q episode. And the actor that plays Q Jr., Q2, whatever, is Keegan Delancey, John's actual son. So that's kind of awesome. And still to this day, I remember watching this episode, but I don't remember it being so far towards the series finale. For some reason, I thought it was much sooner than that. But I've still wanted to see both Q and Q2 return. Even in Picard, to see Keegan return would be great. So, and they don't even have to. Even if it was in Discovery or something, to just have Keegan pop in, I would totally be down for it. So the very beginning of this episode, where E-Chip is actually reading the essay about Kirk, and it's supposed to be a 20-minute presentation. It's 34 chapters or something, which is kind of great. I really enjoyed it. And the fact that they're talking about Kirk is kind of interesting. And they even mention his historic 5-year mission in 2270. So stuff like that always kind of jumps out at me, and I really liked it. And then, of course, we do see Keegan come in as Q2, just being a smart-ass teenager. It's so great to actually see him, and he doesn't have a lot of scenes, the Q and Q2, but it would have been interesting to see them more, and even to see the mom show up, even though she has briefly mentioned that she's so embarrassed she, left and disowned him, but it would have kind of been interesting to see the family function. I do love the scene where, he, strips 7 of 9, and he's talk about perfection. Stuff like that kind of made me laugh, especially he's this omnipotent being that can do whatever he wants, but that's all he's focused on is 7 of 9, and him being a teenage boy, of course he wants to see her naked. So just stuff like that. The scene with Neelix was rough, just from the very beginning, where he calls him a kitchen rat, and then he fuses his jaw, closes, the mouth, and removes the vocal cords. It is really a rough scene. And then, of course, where he brings the Borg in, to see, let's see what humans are like under pressure, and there's 3 Borg cubes attacking Voyager, and then, of course, our Q comes to the rescue, gets rid of the Borg, and fixes the Talaxian. And I love it, because Q's what have I always told you? Don't provoke the Borg! Which, the whole reason Starfleet even met the Borg was because of Q. So maybe he's speaking from experience at that point. Of course, they end up taking Q2's powers away, which is very reminiscent of the whole episode with RQ getting his powers taken away, being in the brig and stuff like that. I think it was Deja Q. But it was very reminiscent. To be honest with you, they even kind of have similar endings with the whole sacrificing type thing. Except for it doesn't work with Q2. I did like the whole treaty thing, where it's a Nausicaan, a Bolian, Bajoran Cardassian, and I think there was a Romulan in there, and they're all fighting over this space, and Q2 has to kind of come to the rescue and make them all more diplomatic, and of course he ends up cheating. It's very Kobayashi Maru feeling. And he also gets E-Chip to write an essay for him. So all of this is just great to watch this character development. And then when he does finally write the essay, it's IQ, the Insider's Guide to the Continuum, which Peter David, one of my favorite authors, has actually wrote a book called IQ, and it's supposed to be like Q's autobiography. It's really interesting. So he presents it to his dad. Dad's not that impressed, and so Q basically has to come up with something else. And this is the part that kind of like affected me as a teenager, because like I was probably, I think, 13 when this episode came out. And so being 13 and living in like a very religious household, a very sheltered thing, like I never knew what like slash fiction was or like shipping. I mean, that wasn't even a thing back then. But let me tell you, the whole itchy cue ball thing, like I made a lot of stories based on Q and Ichib being together because I thought that would have been the cutest couple of all time. And still, years later, I think they still could have been, because they do have that amazing friendship. And then this is kind of where it goes back to the Deja Q episode, where Ichib gets injured and Q wants to sacrifice himself, but like the species won't do it. They're like, no, this is all your fault. And then it ends up being this big test by John Delancey that he set it up to see if Q Jr. would actually be willing to do it. But when they go to the judges, which kind of bothered me a little bit, like I get that the 3 judges are supposed to be like reminiscent of when we first saw Q in that outfit, but that's not realistically, that's supposed to be like Earth history judges, not what the continuum would look like. So I feel like that was a little bit of a goof. But they're not really impressed. Like, they don't really care that he was going to sacrifice himself because Ichib was injured because of Q in the first place. And so, like, of course, RQ, like, talks back to him and does get everything back the way it should be. It's cleaned up a little too nicely for me there at the end, but he does give them a pad that will take off some years off their journey, which I had mentioned in the first 2 episodes Q appeared in. Like, why didn't he just, boop, there you go, there's a decade off. Which at this point, it's supposed to be a 70-year journey, and we're 7 years into it, but they've already taken off 40 years. Like, at this point, they're less than 30,000 light years away. So, realistically, like, they're past the halfway point. So, I don't know, that the whole thing with, it feels like every other episode, oh, there goes 10 years, there goes 10 years. And so, I was okay with, like, Q not really helping them. So for those who have seen this one, I absolutely adored it. I thought it was great just to see like Ichib and Q's partnership. Any episode where John Delancey's in it, I'm super excited for. The directing was great. For those who have seen it, what did you guys think about the return of Q? What did you think about Q Jr. and Ichib? And then just kind of what did you think overall? Especially we're like 5 episodes away from the series finale. So go ahead, let me know. Thank you guys for watching and subscribing, and I will see you guys next time for Author.